when I say breaking stuff, coming in, figuring stuff out, breaking things as a career.
In all honesty, I still don't know how I handled it. That no, this is not a bug, and I'm telling you, it works on my side. Check again.
What do you mean it's not working? Leave me alone.
This is not a bug.
Once this thing goes into the wild,
We can't send out something into a live production for the user to now find a flaw.
questions will be asked of that person there. How are things? What have you broken today? Welcome to Coding Culture, the podcast all about technology, innovation, and everything in between. I am your host, Kgang. If you cannot pronounce that, you can call me Kgang. Today we'll be discussing a very interesting topic. As a former developer, I initially used to have a contentious relationship, but eventually with maturity, I learned what it was, and that is software quality assurance. In simple terms, the people that try to break your code. So with that statement, you can understand why we used to take it so personally. We've got Karmen who will be joining us today just to take us through what quality assurance is, how it works, and how everything fits together. Do remember, we've got some interesting prizes that you can win. So pay close attention to what we're talking about. There will be a question later on during the podcast that you could win a prize if you know the answer. Jumping straight in, Karmen, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much, Kgang.
How are things? And what have you broken today?
I actually didn't break anything today. I said I'll just go easy because everyone's under pressure. So I don't want to add more pressure to anyone. So I'm not breaking anything. I'm taking sabbatical on breaking anything today.
Okay, I think you had in the intro there, I was talking about relationships now.
Yeah.
Being in software quality assurance, how are your relationships with the rest of the team? You know, people are it's personal. Sometimes when you break stuff, it's like criticism. How do people receive you?
So I think with the developers, in the beginning, it was that sort of relationship that we had, you know, as quality assurance, quality analysts, when we used to go to them and say to them, listen, this is a bug, you know, and they would come back and say, but it's working on my side. So we always had that divide, or we always had that sort of situation that was, you know, taking place, you know. And then after a while, as that relationship with the developers, we got together and we started collaborating more. I got a lot more experience in my role as well as they did. And then what that did for them was it sort of, we got to the point where we started to trust each other's judgments, you know? So there hasn't been any sort of like bad relationship, but there's always that sort of, bickering or that sort of, argument that no, this is not a bug, and I'm telling you, it works on my side. Check again. Or the famous one is refresh the page, which is the famous one. So yeah, so we sort of ironed that part out now. I think they rely on us as well, and that helps the relationship when it comes to quality assurance.
Nice. I think you mentioned a few things there. There was one that works for me.
Yeah.
I think during my earlier years, there used to be a thing. You do your thing, it works. Yeah. You just don't understand. What do you mean it's not working? Leave me alone.
Yes. Especially when you're logging that defect and then you're assigning it to the developer, and then immediately, like, you just get a response and they are, no, this is not a bug. You know, so yeah.
Nice. And then what did coming in, figuring stuff out, breaking things as a career, like what made you go in that direction?
I think in the beginning, so before I actually started off becoming a quality analyst, I used to work as a website administrator. So I used to work very closely with the developers. So what would happen is if they built the shell of that website, I would just do the content population, you know, the nitty gritty and the repetitive tasks. And then I sort of found myself getting more involved in the eye for detail, and I wanted to have, like, if I thought that the button should do this or the navigation should be this way, I was more interested in that. Nice. And then somehow I thought to myself, okay, let me do a bit of research. And, you know, if this is a passion that I have, I'm sure there's this career for it. And that's when I stumbled upon quality assurance. Well, software quality assurance.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I think I'm making it very basic when I say breaking stuff, but I think a lot of what you do is trying to find out things in advance. Like it feels like almost like protecting the team.
Let's put it this way. It's like I advocate for the user's experience, right? But I'm also there as this brand ambassador for quality assurance, you know. We can't send out something into a live production for the user to now find a flaw in the system, you know, that doesn't bring back a good brand reputation for the organization. It's not a good experience for the user. And there's also this potential compensation payouts that if something goes live and there's a flaw there, we've got to now pay out and all this compensation for something. So we try to reduce that.
That's very interesting on that one.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, an example just came to mind where in banking a couple of years ago, something happened, accounts were credited with money, and some people had already withdrawn their funds.
And how do you get that back?
That's where I was going. And also, like, it seems like it's a high pressure environment because at that point, whoever was the quality analyst on that, questions will be asked of that person there. So how do you handle the pressure of having to know that once this thing goes into the wild, I was responsible for saying, is this thing working the way that it's expected?
In all honesty, I still don't know how I handle it. Like if I have a big project that I've worked on and I need to, and it's going live, I promise you, I like keep my fingers crossed. And as soon as I hear a word like rollback, I'm already scared because the first, and okay, it's factual that the fact is you're gonna come and ask, how did QA test this? You know? So handling that pressure, I am still learning how to handle it. But as I've learned to be in this role, I trust on peer reviews. I trust a pre-live environment that we can deploy into. So that sort of sets me back and keeps me grounded to know, okay, you know what? I've executed all my test cases, my planning and analysis phase. I've covered all the important aspects of the software. So that gives me that sort of reassurance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then let's dive a bit deeper into the building blocks here now. Like in terms of processes, like what do you follow? Do you have a new process every time there's a project, or is there prescribed best industry practices? Like what happens there?
So as quality analyst, we would follow the fundamental testing process. So that starts from your test planning and analysis phase, and then we filter it down into the implementation and design. And it's sort of, like you said, building blocks. So in my test planning and analysis phase, I would use that specification document from the business to now plan out what do I need for this testing? What type of testing am I going to be doing? You sort of analyze everything at that point in time. And then with like submitting test plan, it sort of helps the project or the stakeholders to know, okay, I need X amount of time to test this particular piece of software. When it goes into implementation and design, that's where we actually prepare our test cases. Okay. So how we will go about now executing the test cases, and then we move into the test execution phase. The phase that I think is a bit where it takes a bit longer is that defect logging and tracking phase, because that's where we're now, like you call it, breaking the system. So that phase is always that back and forth, you know, and that's where we come into the whole retesting and regression sort of aspect. And then closure is the part I think we all look for. You know, we look at the idea of saying, okay, we're now signing off, this is ready for production, we're giving it a thumbs up. So that's when it comes to testing, that method still stands, unless we sort of get where we're doing maintenance on software. Okay. So if there's some sort of a live issue, you would obviously not really follow that practice because that would require you testing it immediately. So that's where we would differ a bit.
Interesting. I think when you mentioned test cases there, that's where I was wondering, is this where the diabolical mind comes in now? When you're looking at this thing, you're like, how can I poke and prod?
Yes, absolutely. Because it's we all want a happy path. Let's put it that way. We all want a happy way of testing something or verifying the system is doing what it's supposed to be doing, you know? But there's your negative testing, which is, I think, I rely on to break that software. I want to know that if a form is meant to receive numerical values, but I want to take it a bit further and I want to I want to put in alphabets there. I want to put in special characters. And that's something that I think that when it comes to planning out those test cases, you've got to be, like you said, diabolical. You've got to go in depth. There's times where I think we have projects where we've got over 50 test cases. Yeah. But it's vital to the project because that's the system that we're testing. That's the functionality. That's how the system is meant to work.
And in terms of personality and negotiation, let's say you did find bugs or issues or whichever word people prefer. And let's say I'm the dev in this scenario. Yeah. You found something there. Yeah. It's supposed to be 10 digits in this thing. You can put 15.
Yeah.
And then I come to you and say, based on project deadlines, I don't think this is important for right now.
Yeah.
Karmen, just forget about this thing. What's your approach in balancing the business priorities that need to go, as well as making sure that the quality aspect is met? How do you balance those two things?
But it comes down to what I told you in the beginning. I have to advocate for the user. I have to advocate for the business. Yes, there's going to be an instance where we have a relationship with the developer. Yes. So you're coming to me and you're like, Karmen, but this is not an issue. And for me, before we even get to that conversation, I prefer logging that defect. Okay. So we have some sort of tracking. We use it in our defect management an approach of how we can track these defects. Nice. So when I assign it to you and you look at it and you're like, Karmen, it's not an issue.
Sounds like something I would do.
And I would be like, okay, maybe let's take it to somebody more senior. Maybe they can say, okay, you know what, listen, this is not. And one of the things that I do, which the developers don't like me doing, is I'm like, put a comment and tell me it's not an issue. Because why I say this is because we're both saying to meet that deadline, let's bypass it. But when it goes to live, it's going to come back and then it's going to be like, how did QA pass this? So I have this defect where I asked Kgang and he was like, no, it's not. So it's some sort of a way in which we have proof that, this was tested, but we came to an agreement where we said this is not an issue. So I try to keep that sort of balance when it comes to logging the defects.
I think I'm going to push a bit harder there now. Let's say we understand we're advocating for the user.
Yes.
But the delivery is also going to benefit the user. Are you ever in a situation where you're like, okay, this is a bug. We know it's a bug. It's low priority. We're going to deploy with it. It stays there. Okay. We'll fix it later.
In that case, if it's like something we can say now where we've got the product specialist involved and we now want to say, okay, it is a low priority, then I would focus on the high priority ones. And then, of course, meeting that deadline, let's go to live. And we can now say, okay, we're taking 1 day after we've gone into production to now fix this. So we would now set our defects according to their priority. So we start with the highest one, the one that would affect the user, would affect users, we're losing money. Yes. So, and then move on to the low priorities. But it would be something that we would need to obviously get to, and then retest it.
I like room for negotiation. That's all I was trying to get.
I can see that.
That's all I was trying to get.
I can see that.
So when testing approaches, I think that there's automated testing, there's manual testing. And can you just maybe expound on that and just let us know what are the differences? What's the advantage of when to use this one day?
Okay. So when it comes to functional testing, we manually execute these test cases. So functional testing, manual testing. Okay. We would manually execute our test cases. We would need to have a strong eye for detail. We're going to be very analytical in how we're thinking and the approach that we're using when we're testing the system. We would use tools like test management tools like Jira and ZephyrScale to execute our test cases. Right? When it comes to the automation side of it, the automation testing, they automate their test cases. So they actually have one up on us because they can actually reduce human error in their testing. They would actually get things much faster into production than we would. And then one of the things that is also different is that they would need to be proficient in programming languages, which is Python, which is Java, and then they sort of use testing frameworks. So on our end, we would use, as automation testers, we would use Locus.io. Okay. We would use Playwright. We would use Postman. So that's the bit of the differences in the approaches and the testing tools that we use.
Okay, makes sense. I think one thing that made me have a better relationship with the QA team in general is that return on investment. Like,
Yes.
I think maybe talk to us about when an issue is found in production versus when it's found in pre-life versus when it's found in QA. Is there a difference as to how much it costs? Like, can you just explain the return on investment for QA as a whole?
I think in that aspect, it comes down to the cost of the cost reduction in fixing these defects. If we sort of isolate it in UAT, we have time to fix it and it gets out. We push the project into production a lot more faster, but we also don't lose, like I mentioned, compensation payouts. You know, that sort of thing helps us not to take something into live to, like I said, for the user to find it out, you know. Another thing would be the improving our brand quality. So, you know, brand reputation is important. That's how we generate sales. That's how we get more investment into the company. We get buy-in in trusting us as a provider to deliver quality assurance products. So those are the things that I would think about that we get out of quality assurance in terms of return of investments.
No, I definitely understand the value in that. And as you were talking about, some of the things there like that come out from like that text box where you put strings that were supposed to be numbers.
Yes.
Sometimes that's the gateway for hackers and other people to take advantage
Correct.
of the system.
Yes.
So the value is definitely there. So if you were to speak to a developer right now in closing,
I feel like I am.
and explain to them and make them understand that in the long run,
Yeah.
this is good for you, how would you sum that up?
So explain to the developer
To
that
the
what I'm
developer,
doing
to
is
make
good
them
for you.
understand why it's good for them, for me in this case, as a developer.
So I think the approach would be very simple, and I try my best not to. When I'm approaching the developer, I try to do it in baby steps, and it's like I've always used this analogy, you know. For a developer, if they've been on that project for like 6 months, you can't go to that developer and tell them their baby's ugly, you know. So what I try to do is I try to like get to the point where I can replicate the steps for them, you know, get them to the point where we can isolate the defect together to show them they know what, this is vital, this is an issue, this is something that's going to cause a ripple effect if we take it to production. So the approach for me is very important. You know, I wouldn't want to be too critical in how I'm explaining something. I'd want to go, you know, with my soft skills. I try, obviously, if it's a pressured environment, it's very hard to stay balanced. But yeah, that's something that I would do. I want us to sit together and iron out those issues, you know? Yeah.
Nah, I think I'm sold. I think that explanation will, I would listen.
I feel like you're going to use this against me.
I think I'd listen to that explanation there. But thank you for taking us through everything quality assurance there. So I think now we're familiar with some tools, we're familiar with some processes. We understand why the relationship between the developers and the QA can get contentious. That's politically correct word there. But we also understand the value and why it is very important.
And why they need us.
Why you are absolutely
why they
needed.
need us. But you know what, Kgang? I feel like they rely on us. And after we've had many instances within our space where something has happened, they have now seen the value of quality assurance, you know. And there's instances where, as developers, they need to do dev testing. And they sort of apply their brain in the same way we would apply it in our testing, our exploratory testing, whether it's regression. So they see the value that's added. So I think now they're like, oh, okay, you know what? We tolerate you guys. We accept it because you guys are there protecting us, you know, protecting our code. Yes. So that actually helps.
Okay. Thank you very much for the conversation there. So to the viewers now, after that investigation and the conversation, I think I mentioned the prize earlier. I think one thing that stood out for me now, what tools can get used in automated testing? I think Karmen mentioned quite a few there. So you can just name one, go to the comments, type it out. I'll repeat the question. What tools can get used in automated testing? I think that concludes our conversation with Karmen. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are Coding Culture, the podcast that tells you all about technology, the trends, and everything in between. I am your host with the most, Kgang. If you cannot pronounce it, call me Kgang. Also, just a reminder, click the link in our bio to join our mailing list to know what's coming up next. Share the podcast. Let's have a conversation around why people break stuff and why it's important that they do. Make sure that you subscribe, share, and all that good stuff. This is Kgang. Remember, stay coding and stay being innovative. Out.